This is an I Am Listening original podcast.
I've had a lot of this on X with one particular Labour councillor, and it's just a constant sort of stream of just, you've done this, you've done that. And it's actually, there's not always a truth. It's not always being told in a lot of these cases, and it's just very frustrating. It's like, let's just get on with the job and do what we're here to do, and that's to serve Medway residents and get the best outcome as possible.
Welcome to the Kent Politics Podcast, your go-to source for insightful discussions on local and national political matters. Join us as we take a deep dive into local government across the county. Find out what the key decision makers have to say, what your money is being spent on, and how the party's policies could affect how we live. Plus, don't miss our regular feature, Westminster Watch, where we dissect the latest developments and decisions shaping the political landscape in the heart of the UK's capital. Engage with us as we delve into the issues that matter to you and explore the dynamic world of politics from a Kent perspective.
Welcome to the Kent Politics Podcast in a week that sewage is back on the agenda, roadworks are winding people right up, and news of a city that came up with a plan. I'm Simon Finlay, local democracy reporter covering Kent County Council, and I'm joined by my usual accomplices, Daniel Lesson, who reports on borough and district councils in Kent.
Hello.
And Robert Boddy, who is the local democracy reporter for Medway.
Hello.
And we'll also be speaking to KM political editor Paul Francis about the week in Westminster. And our special guest this week is Elizabeth Turpin, former deputy leader of the Tories in Medway. She's quit, saying her colleagues don't like change. First up, we're going to talk to Robert about what's happening in Medway.
So, river pollution is an issue which affects areas across the country, and Medway is no different. The Medway Liberal Democrats are calling on the council to do regular testing of water from the River Medway after they found amounts of E. coli which were 3 times higher than safe levels. They took 2 samples of water from St Mary's Island and from the Strand in Gillingham and found these high levels which indicate sewage or animal waste contamination.
So what are the Lib Dems asking for?
So they want the council to do regular testing of the water and to issue warnings when levels are too high. The areas they sampled from are popular spots for dog walking and things like that, and the high levels of E. coli can, in some cases, cause really serious illnesses. So obviously it's an election year, so the local Lib Dems also say that if they were to win in Westminster, they would abolish Ofwat, which is the regulator, and replace it with a more powerful regulator, and ban bonuses of water company bosses if they continue to pollute, among other things.
But this isn't a problem that's limited to Medway necessarily, but sewage pollution is a real problem here, isn't it?
Yes, I mean, so last year, Unearth, the journalism project from Greenpeace, did a study about the number of sewage spills across the UK. And in 2022, Medway suffered 700 hours worth of spillages, which amounts approximately to about 600 million litres. Both ourselves and our colleagues at KMTV contacted the council for a comment about the suggestions made by the Medway Lib Dems, but they didn't respond.
Thanks, Robert. Now moving on to second-tier councils. Dan, what's been happening with you then?
So another Kent district has got its local plan process underway. So Canterbury City Council has put out the new version of its development plan for the next 15 years, which will cover everything from house building to public transport in the district.
OK, and did Canterbury Council not already have a local plan?
Yes and no. So under the previous Tory administration, the council had put out its own version of the local plan for the first consultation. They have to do several of these as part of the process. That's the version which very controversially contained a plan for splitting the city into traffic zones and regulating how frequently people could drive between them, and building a big new road on the outskirts of the city which people would have to drive onto and drive around the city to come back in. Both of those two major policies have been scrapped. When the Labour and the Liberal Democrats won most of the seats on the City Council in the election in May, they promised to basically put officers to work redrafting the local plan and doing away with those two major policies. So that's, this is essentially the culmination of months of reworking all of that.
So they've done away with the traffic zones and all that, which got a lot of attention, not just in Kent, but what else have they changed?
Quite a bit, actually. They first and foremost, they've shortened the period the plan covers. The previous version was went up to 2045. This one only goes up to 2040. So that means that this plan period shows the proposed locations for around 9,500 homes rather than the 13,500 in the previous version. As part of that overall reduction in the amount of houses over the plan period that this covers, they've scrapped a pretty controversial plan for just over 3,000 homes at Cooting Farm. It's a site in the little village of Addersham, which basically would have connected it to the nearing village of Aylsham in Dover district. But as well as getting rid of that, they've also added a plan for an entirely new settlement of 2,000 homes on land north of the University of Kent, nearish the existing village of Tyler Hill. But it important to note that the shortening of the plan period from 2045 to 2040 doesn't mean that Canterbury needs to build less houses overall. If government targets say that the district needs to build X number of houses by a given point, the council will have to plan to accept them or face the consequences. It's just in this case they've shortened the period the plan covers.
So what happens now then?
So the substance of the local plan itself hasn't officially been approved yet, but on Monday the Cabinet voted to consult the public for their views on it. That means there's a 12-week consultation where residents, businesses and the like can give the council their views on the proposals, either online or by post. After that, the council can alter the plans accordingly and send it out for another consultation for another round of the public's opinion. And then after that, they need to send it to the government's planning inspectorate by the end of June 2025. And that government body, the planning inspectorate, gets the final say. So if the final version of the plan doesn't hit housing targets or violates national planning policy in some other way, Canterbury City Council can be sent back to the drawing board. It's pretty early days as of yet, but the version of the plan they're putting out to consultation does hit their government targets, so that's not that likely to happen.
Okay, thanks very much, Dan.
So, Simon, what's been happening at County Hall for the past 7 days?
Well, we're on the vexed subject of road closures, which seems to be happening all over the county at the minute. How many of us sat in traffic because of roadworks lately? I would imagine just about everybody. But the news really is that a new team of KCC inspectors have found that nearly a third of road closures in the county were actually breaking the rules for which the permits that they've closed them were issued. This came as a result of Councillor Sean Holden, who represents Cranbrook, and members of the Environment and Transport Cabinet Committee calling for an inspectorate dedicated to examining how these roadworks are being conducted. A sample of 59 were audited by the inspectors and 18 of them were not complying with the terms of the road closure agreement. It's a very small sample, fair enough, but they were caught to be falling short on things like safety, roads closed but no work started, 4 with incorrect signing and 3 that could have used an alternative traffic management system. These findings were disclosed by Simon Jones, the Kent County Council's Highways and Transport boss, in a briefing to members. And he said that a 30% strike rate raised questions and concerns.
So what is the scale of road closures in Kent at the moment?
Well, if you take it by the number of permits that have been issued by Kent County Council, it's gone from 4,000 in 2019 to 12,000 last year. And he says it's a combination of, the Councillor Holden says, it's a combination of utility company works, water companies, gas, etc., road maintenance, which would be Kent Highways, contractors overrunning or not starting on time, and works associated with house building. Councillor Holden wants greater scrutiny on the emergency closures, where companies can suddenly shut roads. We've seen it all happen. We've all seen it happening without any warning, and then sometimes the work doesn't start for days on end afterwards. So, he says, like everyone has driven past works where no actual work is going on, and he says that residents are getting fed up to the back teeth of it.
So this is all pretty knotty technical detail about roadworks, which most people never really look into. How and why has this all come to light?
Well, it's literally because the committee, the Councillor Holden is chairman of, pushed for this small inspectorate of 4 inspectors dedicated to analysing the conduct of companies who are carrying out the works. And if they hadn't gone and had a look to see what they were doing, we wouldn't have found it out. So he says if you extrapolate that figure of 12,000 and you take say about a third of them not complying, that would be about 3,500 plus works that wouldn't be actually doing them by the rules. But what Councillor Holden and the team of inspectors have revealed is that they're often shut for no good reason. Those works that are being done are not always doing it by the rules. But as he put it, we're onto them.
And what ultimately can be done about this?
Well, they want bigger fines, much bigger fines. The fines at the minute are literally just a very small amount of money if they overrun by a few days. The government minister is behind higher fines. He wants to fine utility companies or whoever is transgressing the rules up to £10,000 per day for overrunning street works if it goes into weekends or bank holidays. Well, it obviously causes people an awful lot of disruption. That's echoed by people on Kent County Council. But fines for working days could be around KCC, and KCC members are in favour of deterrence being much higher and much stronger and much faster and much swifter as well. Well, that wraps up what's been happening across Kent and Medway. Thanks, Dan and Robert, for being here today.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Next up, we're speaking to Paul Francis, our political editor, about events at Westminster. How are you doing, Paul?
Oh, good, thanks, Simon.
Yeah, what's going on then?
Well, you've heard me say this almost every time we do the podcast, but it's been another challenging week for the Conservative Party and the Prime Minister Rishi Sunak, who's had to deal with the defection of its former Vice Chairman Lee Anderson to the Reform Party. Now, he triggered a row after claiming that the London Mayor Sadiq Khan had given our capital city away to his mates, and that led to a fairly excruciating couple of days in which members of the Conservative Party said his comments were wrong, but not racist.
Right, OK. Is this a coup for the Reform Party? And do you think there may be some other Conservative MPs who might be considering jumping ship?
Well, I'll take the second bit of that question first. There are said to be a group of Conservative MPs who are toying with the possibility and pondering defection, but there's no names, no pack drill, so we don't know at this stage. As to whether it's a coup for the Reform Party, I guess it depends which way you're looking at it. I mean, it's a small party. It's more of a political movement in some senses, and it's now got an MP in its ranks, and that undoubtedly gives it a platform which it perhaps didn't have before.
So this is not without precedence, of course. You know, you and I both covered the Rochester and Stroud by-election about 10 years ago now. And
yes, 2015.
Yeah, 2014-15, yeah. And but the first one was Douglas Carswell. He was the MP for Clacton. And then in Kent, it was Mark Reckless. Didn't always end very well, did it?
No, it didn't. Mark Reckless, to his credit, decided to call a by-election when other people who've made similar defections haven't. And he won that by-election. You'll remember it was a furious campaign going on between the Conservatives who were trying to stop UKIP in its tracks. But Reckless won that by-election in 2014, went on to lose it in 2015 and left the area and is now a member of the Welsh Assembly.
Yes, he went from the Conservative Party to UKIP to Independence, the Brexit Party to the Abolish the Welsh Assembly Party, which is and interestingly enough,
some political journey.
Yes, and his agent, so the Conservative agent at the time was one Richard Holden, who's now the chairman of the party. But I believe that our colleague and friend Daniel has a fun fact about Douglas Carswell.
Well, two things. Firstly, that interestingly enough, Douglas Carswell's father was also famous. He's the inspiration for the book The Last King of Scotland about a doctor working in Uganda. But I also want to say, interesting that Lee Anderson now defects to a different party while keeping his seat because he previously supported an act in Parliament which would compel members of Parliament to call by-elections when they change party, which obviously he has chosen not to do.
It was an interesting by-election, the Rochester and Stroud one, because remember all the big hitters were sent out because it was very high profile. Stephanie Flanders was there from Newsnight. There was Michael Crick from Channel 4, John Pienaar from Radio 5 Live. Priti Patel was there doing stuff with Adam Bolton on Sky. And Michael Crick got into a very lengthy and rather awkward looking conversation with Nigel Farage when he showed up. It was a very interesting evening. But ultimately,
the whole campaign was.
Yeah, it was quite intense and quite bitter at times.
Yes, and if you wanted to confront a political figure from either side of the spectrum, you could do if you just turned up in Rochester High Street and stood around for an hour. Someone would come along.
There was a lot of high-profile people there, and in the end, I seem to remember that Mark Reckless won it, but it was with a fairly reduced majority. And I remember some of the journalists from the lobby pack, people like Adam Bolton, were all taking bets on what they thought what the final outcome would be. No one thought he would lose it, but they were betting on what the majority was going to be. So there you go. We've had another controversy regarding the Conservative Party about a £10 million donation. Can you just sort of bring us up to date with that one?
Yes, this is the comment alleged to have been made by a guy called Frank Hester, who is a Tory party donee and made some rather disobliging comments about Diana Abbott, the Labour MP, which he has not denied and has apologised for. But the issue is turned into it in a different direction now because the Conservatives are being pressed by Labour and other parties to return the £10 million it got in a donation from this guy. Now,
well, surely they've spent it already, haven't they?
Yes. I was about to say there may well be some difficulty if they did, because I suspect they would have spent some of this money already unless they're banking it for the election campaign, of course. So a defection followed by a donation row followed by lots of denials. It's a strange week.
It's the end of a parliament as well. Finally, the profile of a former Kent MP who became a Tory party leader about 20 years ago is on the up. What's going on there then?
Yeah, it's Michael Howard, or perhaps we should give him the proper title now, Lord Howard of Lymm. He's coming over as another political super sub by Rishi, who is appearing more regularly in the media. And I'm wondering whether this is a trend we're beginning to see of rebooting political careers, which we thought had ended. We've got a new Foreign Secretary, and he's David Cameron, the previous leader of the Conservative Party and Prime Minister, and he's been brought on board. So I don't know whether this is a trend or not, whether we're going to see more recruitment of people who perhaps we thought to resign from politics. But it's just an interesting thing to see. I mean, there's a calculation here. Michael Howard wasn't always the most universally liked MP as Foreign Secretary, as Home Secretary, as in particular. So it might not be the great coup that the Reform Party are claiming they've had this week. In the fight for media attention, it's still the Reform Party who's winning at this stage.
Don't you think it's probably more a case of bringing Lord Howard back because the party needs a bit of heft, needs a heavyweight?
Yeah, I agree. It's and he was and still has all the guile of an experienced politician and knows exactly which buttons to press to get people on side.
Okay, thank you, Paul, for your insight into what's happening at Westminster this week. See you next week.
Yes, look forward to it.
Is there a topic that you would like to be discussed on the Kent Politics podcast? Perhaps you've got a question for one of our panel, or you'd like to comment on a hot topic in local or national government. Get in touch by emailing or sending a voice note to kentpoliticspodcast@thekmgroup.co.uk.
After a defeat at the local elections last year, putting them out of control for the first time in 20 years, you might expect Medway Conservatives to reflect and readjust their approach. Elizabeth Turpin resigned not only as deputy leader but from the Tory group entirely, saying colleagues weren't prepared to change. And she says she found herself at odds with the majority. She joins Robert and myself to speak about her reasons for the decision. And hello, Elizabeth.
Hi.
Elizabeth, in your own words, can you just explain your reasons for leaving the Tory group at Medway Council?
Yeah, I can. It's, it wasn't just local issues, to be honest. There was some national issues as well that were kind of starting to sort of grate on me and just I was feeling uncomfortable with. But sort of on a local level, over the past 3 years, I guess, there were sort of decisions that we were taking that I wasn't particularly comfortable with. You would have known that because it was in the public domain. There were things that there were cabinet decisions that I'd called in. There were decisions that our group made that I sort of voted against. I felt sort of going forward, I hope that, as I put in my letter, I could kind of move on from those decisions. But I just felt that they were sort of, some of those things were kind of putting the local authority in the position that we're in now. Especially sort of around finance.
To sort of dig into that a little bit, what sort of the decisions were it particularly that sort of pushed you towards making this decision?
I think for me, sort of how we've, responded to sort of development out on the Hoo Peninsula and the HIF. That was something I wasn't particularly comfortable with, the Housing Infrastructure Fund, but that money was awarded to us in 2019, so just sort of right at the start of when I was elected. And so I, felt that, we've got that money, we need to make the best of it. And so I did work hard with officers and with local residents, as did my 2 ward colleagues, to try and make the best of that money. And, it was a big investment into the area. So it wasn't, it was something that we encouraged. However, we could see that first and foremost, that money just wasn't going to be enough for what we were sort of saying we were going to deliver. And just other things that weren't being honoured, if you like. There were cabinet decisions with regards to sort of surveys that should be taking place on the peninsula. There was a promise of a new leisure facility out at Hoo. Nothing further has been done on that. And now it's all sort of underpinned on Section 106 money. And then there was that sort of decision to rebuild splashes, when the people of the Hoo Peninsula, have been waiting for a refresh of their leisure facilities for years, and a promise of that hasn't come.
As you said there, these decisions have been over a number of years. How long had you actually been considering sort of parting with the group, and was that a particularly difficult decision?
It was a really difficult decision. I am a Conservative. I joined the Conservative Party. I hold Conservative principles, and so that's where I felt I should be, but it's just when you kind of start feeling quite negative, and you just feel that maybe you're not longer in the majority over the majority of decisions, I think you kind of feel you have to step away because not for your own benefit, but for the sake of the group as well. If you're not aligned, correctly, of course, there's in groups, there is always going to be decisions you don't agree with. And I'm sure it's the same for the Labour group. I'd be very surprised if, all of them agreed all of the time. It's just not possible. But you have to agree most of the time is how I feel about it.
Did you have any particular differences with other members of the group? There
was no particular disagreements as such. I mean, there has been, certainly, and I think that's been, reported. There was, splashes, as I've mentioned, was something I felt we shouldn't have gone ahead with at that time. We were in very difficult financial position and I could not see how we could afford to do it. So that was something, I was openly against. The HIF, again, is something that I just didn't feel was affordable. The governance on it was not as it should have been. And, I kept voicing sort of my opinions on that as well. And just the fact that, that money was withdrawn, I felt it was down to those factors, the fact that we hadn't sort of had proper governance over it, and that's why it was not successful.
In your resignation letter, you mentioned, among other things, one of the things that Medway Council prided itself on having the lowest council tax in Kent. But you said, what's been the cost of this, the impact on services. I mean, as part of the group, have you been making these arguments against the majority position, and how were your arguments received?
With the council tax, that isn't something that I'd kind of raised as such when we were the administration. I think some of the financial difficulties we're in weren't properly sort of put across to us. I think we were in the dark over a lot of it until later in the day. So I think now it's sort of apparent that we can't really, do our statutory services to a high level with having this low council tax. It does come at a cost. And of course, I want to keep any sort of tax at as low as possible, and it is something, like I say, that we have been proud of, but I've sort of come to the realisation, maybe a bit slowly, that actually that isn't maybe something that we should be proud of. We need to, it is, if your services are all really good and you're delivering sort of really high statutory services and you can do things outside of that, then great. But if you can't, then I think you need to be realistic about that. You need to be open and honest with the electorate, and you kind of say, we need to raise it. Of course, you don't want to raise it at huge levels. It's difficult for people with the cost of living crisis. They've got to be able to afford it as well. But, we've got very important services that we are delivering, for children and for vulnerable adults as well.
A key point of contention in the previous administration, which you were part of, was how to handle Chatham Docks, which, for those who aren't aware, is a working dockyard that is the subject of Peel developers want to change it into sort of mixed use of housing and a sort of industrial park. Could you talk a little bit about sort of your position on this and how that's affected your decision here?
Yeah, of course, Robert. It's something that's been sort of ongoing for several years now. Obviously, as a local authority, we've been trying to get an up-to-date local plan out, and back in October 21 we had Regulation 19 that was coming forward, but within that was the proposal to change the Chatham Docks from an employment to a mixed use site. So for me that would have meant the end of Chatham Docks as it is now. They wouldn't have been able to remain on site. They would have then been sort of lose their rights to sort of be there, their leases. At the moment, they're sort of protected because of the site being employment land only. So, yeah, that was a very big concern for me, and still is, because as much as the Labour Party at the time, when they were in opposition, were very vocal about their support for Chatham Docks, they were bringing forward sort of motions to make the sort of council retain it as employment land. They were getting Keir Starmer involved and sort of voicing his opinion to sort of keep it as an employment site and to save Chatham Docks. Whereas now there seems to be sort of a U-turn on that position, and we've got these proposals on the table from Peel Port to retain some employment on the site, but alongside housing. And unfortunately, promises that they've made in the past with developments and the number of jobs that they're going to provide have not sort of materialised. So I don't see why we would want to risk the jobs, the 800,000 jobs that we've got on that site for sort of a promise of however many jobs that may not materialise, as we've seen that they haven't in the past.
Do you think that the Tory group, now that you've gone into opposition, it's a completely different sort of scenario for you, do you believe that the Tory group has actually come to terms with the mistakes that they've made in recent years?
Well, I guess it's my opinion, I guess, that it's their mistakes, so it would be up to, others to, whether they want to acknowledge they are mistakes or not. I appreciate it is my opinion on that. But I think, what I was finding was it wasn't just the Conservative group, it's just, the Labour group as well. There's a lot of just political game playing at meetings, a lot of sort of political point scoring. I've seen it at the children and young people overview and scrutiny meetings, a couple of months ago, just the Labour Party just, using that forum just to attack the previous administration and the Conservative government rather than actually working on scrutinising reports.
So you've mentioned that you consider yourself, you are still a Conservative, but in your letters you mentioned that sort of both the national and the local party are sort of not upholding those ideals that make you a Conservative. I mean, could you sort of, what sort of things are you talking about there? I mean, is it things like Lee Anderson and the Islamophobia and the most recent thing with this Diane Abbott comments from a major party? Is that the sort of thing you're talking about there?
Yeah, so it's some of those things. It's some of the things that CCHQ have put out on, Twitter that sort of frustrates me of how we're behaving as a party. We're the party in government and we put out sort of pretty awful tweets and I can't get a response from the party chairman with regards to those. I sort of put through my feelings on that, and okay, I might be sort of outnumbered, but you feel that you should at least get a response regarding it. But more importantly, sort of regarding sort of adult social care, I just felt that we haven't addressed that. It's a major issue for us as a country now, and people are living longer, but they're not necessarily having a healthy last few years, and there's big costs involved, and I just don't think that we're just dealing with those issues. I've personally had needing to sort of tap into adult social care, whether that's as a family member or as my role as a private landlord and trying to get help for adults, and it's so difficult. You just wonder what the threshold is if you can't get help for these people.
What would make you rejoin the Conservative group? What would they have to do to draw you back in again?
Well, never say never. I suppose firstly, they'd have to want me to come back. But, secondly, I guess, I want to see all councillors, in the chamber working together for the better of Medway and its residents. So, I'm kind of tired of this sort of toing and froing against each other rather than actually just saying this is what's better. We're not going to oppose things just for the sake of it. I mean, to be fair, the group have, under Councillor Golvin, have sort of done that. They don't want to just oppose things for the sake of it. We have, as a group, we did support, some Labour initiatives that were brought forward. But I just feel that, there's a lot of the time we're just too political. And I think maybe there's a reason to have sort of more independent members on the council, rather than just two main parties.
So you're not, I'm guessing from that answer, you're not particularly interested in perhaps maybe Labour forays to get you to join their side? That's not on the cards? No, definitely not.
But do you think that, as you made a mention of the fact that everybody should be working together, but a slightly naive notion that in any political sphere that you're going to get people who are going to sort of play nicely together?
Yeah, and of course, it does, come with the job and that you're in a political group. There's a place for it, I guess, and Twitter maybe, or X as it is now, is maybe the place for that. But I think sometimes it's done for the sake of it. And, I've had a lot of this on X with one particular Labour councillor, and it's just a constant sort of stream of just, you've done this, you've done that. And it's actually, there's not always a truth is not always being told in a lot of these cases, and it's just very frustrating. It's like, let's just get on with the job and do what we're here to do, and that's to serve Medway residents and get the best outcome as possible.
A key factor in sort of the discourse, if you will, on sort of Twitter and that sort of thing is the fact we're in now an election year, whenever that may be. What direction do you think the national and the local as well Conservative Party needs to go in at the moment? I mean, for example, is Rishi Sunak the right leader to lead the Conservatives into the general election?
Well, I would say probably not, but is it also a good idea to change a leader again, after there's been so many changes? So that's a real difficult one. I mean, I had fairly high hopes when Rishi came in. I think he did well initially, calmed a lot of things down, but then I think he needs to sort of move on and have a bit more direction, which I think they haven't got at the moment. Some of it is, I appreciate, it's difficult. They're trying to deal with sort of immigration numbers, and it seems that whatever they do is blocked as well. So I do have some sympathy with them with regards to things that they're trying to do. But I think a lot of the time it's just too slow. Look at the whole post office scandal. I mean, that's been absolute years and years. Why should innocent people be waiting this kind of length of time to have their situation sorted out? It's the same with the infected blood scandal as well. There's just it just takes too long to get these sort of things sorted out. So that's what I'd like to see, sort of firmer action, swifter action on these matters.
Okay, so final question. Realistically, how do you think the Conservatives are going to do at the general election?
With politics, as we've seen over history, it can often be cyclical. So I think even if I thought they were doing very well at the moment, you often find people want change. And that's what we found when I was knocking on doors of the local election, that people would say they want change, but they couldn't necessarily sort of articulate what that meant. And I think that's, unfortunately, what you find, that after so many years, it's been 15 years, that people want a change of government. They think that's going to sort of solve everything, and I don't think it will necessarily. I don't think a Labour government is going to be a positive change. But I would want to see a Conservative government. As I've said, I am a Conservative. I don't sort of fully support everything that they've done over the last few years, but I certainly wouldn't want a Labour government coming in. But whether they can sort of turn things around quick enough now to make that a success, I'm not sure.
Elizabeth Turpin, thank you very much indeed for your time today, and all the very best for the future.
Thank you.
Thanks to everyone for joining me on this week's podcast. We'll be back next week when we hope to welcome Jeremy Kite, leader of Dartford Council and member of Kent County Council. Don't forget to tune in to KMTV at 5 p.m. for their politics show. All the best now.
Thanks for listening to the Kent Politics Podcast. Don't forget to check out stories throughout the week on the politics page of Kent Online. And you can watch the Kent Politics Show with Rob Bailey on KMTV every Friday at 5 p.m. or on demand at kmtv.co.uk.
This has been an I Am Listening original podcast. For more information, head over to our website, im-listening.co.uk.